They were born into crowns, castles, and crisis, the sons and daughters of Edward II of England and Isabella of France. One would rebuild a fallen dynasty and launch a new age of chivalry. Another would die young in Scotland, remembered only by a marble effigy. A daughter would become a duchess on the continent, ruling through war and rebellion. Another would be sent north to unite two kingdoms, but spend her life childless and exiled, and one forgotten boy, an illegitimate son, would march beside his father and never return. These are the children of Edward II, heirs and exiles who carried the weight of a troubled crown. To understand their fates, we must first understand the kingdom they inherited. Edward II's reign began in 1307 with promise, but descended into political chaos. His favoritism toward Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser the Younger alienated the nobility. Military defeats in Scotland, particularly at Bannockburn in 1314, weakened royal authority. Economic hardship from failed harvests and livestock disease further destabilized the realm. By the 1320s, Edward's queen, Isabella of France, had transformed from dutiful wife to implacable enemy. In 1326, she invaded England with her lover Roger Mortimer and their small army. Edward II fled westward but was captured in Wales. Parliament forced his abdication in January 1327, and he died in captivity at Berkeley Castle that September, murdered, most historians believe, on the orders of Mortimer and Isabella. This political upheaval shaped every aspect of his children's lives. They witnessed their father's deposition, their mother's usurpation of power, and the violent reorganization of the English monarchy. Some thrived in this new order, others were crushed by its weight. The legitimate children, Edward, John, Eleanor, and Joan, were born between 1312 and 1321, spanning the most turbulent decade of their father's reign. Each would respond differently to their inheritance of political instability and dynastic uncertainty. There was also Adam Fitzroy, Edward II's acknowledged illegitimate son, whose brief life embodied his father's personal struggles. Their stories reveal how royal children navigated the collapse and reconstruction of medieval monarchy. Some became architects of recovery, others casualties of circumstance. Together, they represent the human cost and unexpected resilience of dynastic crisis. Edward II's legacy lived on through these 5 lives, transformed, scattered, but never entirely destroyed. Edward of Windsor was born on November 13, 1312, at Windsor Castle. His arrival brought momentary joy to a troubled court. Edward II and Isabella had been married since 1308, and this first child seemed to promise dynastic stability. The infant was immediately recognized as heir to the throne, bearing the traditional title of Earl of Chester. His early childhood unfolded against escalating political crisis. The defeat at Bannockburn in 1314 shattered royal prestige when young Edward was barely 2 years old. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1322 ravaged England during his formative years. Noble rebellions erupted repeatedly as magnates challenged Edward II's authority and his reliance on favorites. Despite this turbulence, Edward received a comprehensive royal education. He was tutored in Latin, French, and English, the 3 languages of medieval England. Military training began early, as befitted a future king who would need to restore English martial reputation. He learned statecraft by observing court proceedings, though the lessons were often about what not to do. The boy's relationship with his parents grew complicated as their marriage deteriorated. Isabella maintained her maternal role while orchestrating political opposition to her husband. Edward II remained distant, increasingly consumed by his favorites and military failures. Young Edward became a symbol of legitimate succession even as his father's regime crumbled. The crisis reached its climax in 1326 when Isabella invaded England. 14-year-old Edward found himself caught between his mother's revolutionary army and his father's collapsing government. He accompanied Isabella and Mortimer as they pursued Edward II across England, witnessing the systematic destruction of royal authority. Parliament assembled at Westminster in January 1327 to formalize the unprecedented deposition of a reigning king. Edward II was forced to abdicate, and his son became Edward III on January 25, 1327. The coronation took place at Westminster Abbey on February 1st, with the young king wearing St. Edward's crown while his father languished in captivity. At 14, Edward III was king in name only. Real power belonged to Isabella and Mortimer, who ruled through a regency council. They controlled royal finances, made key appointments, and directed foreign policy. The new king's authority was carefully circumscribed, his actions monitored, his decisions subject to their approval. The Regency's policies proved deeply unpopular. The humiliating Treaty of Edinburgh and Northampton in 1328 recognized Scottish independence and arranged Edward's sister Joan's marriage to David Bruce. English nobles resented this abandonment of claims their fathers had died defending. Meanwhile, Mortimer accumulated lands and titles, enriching himself at royal expense. Edward III gradually asserted independence as he matured. He married Philippa of Hainault in January 1328, cementing an alliance his mother had negotiated, but creating a partnership that would prove personally fulfilling and politically beneficial. Philippa brought a substantial dowry and connections to the Low Countries that would later prove crucial. The break with Isabella and Mortimer came in October 1330. At Nottingham Castle, Edward's supporters seized Mortimer during a dramatic nighttime raid. The Earl was executed for treason a month later. Isabella was pensioned off to comfortable exile. Her political career permanently ended. At 18, Edward III finally achieved real authority over his kingdom. The new king's priorities became immediately clear. He restored royal dignity through elaborate court ceremonies and chivalric display. The Round Table tournaments of the 1330s consciously evoked Arthurian legend, presenting Edward as a warrior king worthy of his ancestors. He rebuilt relationships with alienated nobles, rewarding loyalty and competence while marginalizing those who had profited under the Regency. Foreign policy offered opportunities for military glory that would restore English prestige. The renewal of war with Scotland in 1332 allowed Edward to reverse his mother's concessions. Victory at Halidon Hill in 1333 demonstrated that English arms could still triumph, avenging the humiliations of his father's reign. The death of Charles IV of France in 1328 had raised questions about the French succession that Edward III would eventually pursue. Through his mother Isabella, Edward had a claim to the French throne stronger than that of Philip VI of Valois. Initially, Edward accepted Philip's accession, but deteriorating relations over Gascony and French support for Scotland created pretexts for war. The 100 Years' War began in 1337 when Edward formally claimed the French crown. His assumption of the title King of France represented not mere territorial ambition, but an assertion of dynastic legitimacy that his father had never possessed. The war would define his reign and transform medieval warfare. Early campaigns established Edward's military genius. The naval victory at Sluys in 1340 secured English control of the Channel. The siege of Calais from 1346 to 1347 gave England a permanent foothold in France. Most dramatically, the victory at Crécy in 1346 shattered French confidence and established English tactical superiority. Edward's military success stemmed from innovative leadership and tactical adaptation. He integrated longbowmen, men-at-arms, and cavalry into devastating combined arms formations. He led from the front, sharing dangers with his soldiers and inspiring fierce loyalty. His campaigns were meticulously planned, well-supplied, and ruthlessly executed. The king's domestic achievements were equally impressive. He transformed Parliament from an occasional royal tool into a regular institution of government. The Statute of Labourers in 1351 attempted to control wages and movement after the Black Death devastated England's population. Legal reforms streamlined odd justice and strengthened royal courts. Edward's court became a center of chivalric culture that influenced all of Europe. The Order of the Garter, founded around 1348, created an elite brotherhood of knights bound to the king by personal loyalty and shared ideals. Tournaments, feasts, and ceremonies projected royal magnificence while reinforcing social hierarchy. The Black Death arrived in England in 1348, killing perhaps one-third of the population. Edward's government responded with remarkable efficiency, maintaining order while adjusting to demographic catastrophe. The king himself remained visible and active, demonstrating that royal authority could survive even apocalyptic crisis. Marriage to Philippa of Hainault proved both personally happy and politically advantageous. She bore 12 children who survived to adulthood, ensuring dynastic continuity while providing valuable diplomatic assets. Her court attracted artists, scholars, and craftsmen who enhanced England's cultural reputation. She also proved an effective regent during Edward's military campaigns. Edward's children included future military heroes like Edward the Black Prince and John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster. Through careful marriages, he allied the royal family with the greatest noble houses of England and Europe. These connections would prove crucial during the later crises of Richard II's reign and the Wars of the Roses. The king's later years brought new challenges. Military stalemate in France exhausted royal finances despite earlier victories. The Black Prince's illness from the 1360s onward created succession uncertainties. Parliament grew more assertive in demanding accountability for royal spending and policy failures. Personal losses also mounted. Queen Philippa died in 1369, ending a partnership that had lasted over 40 years. The Black Prince died in 1376, leaving his 10-year-old son Richard as heir. Edward himself declined rapidly, becoming increasingly dependent on courtiers and mistresses who attracted criticism. Edward III died at Sheen Palace on June 21, 1377, aged 64. He had reigned for 50 years, transforming England from a humiliated and unstable kingdom into a major European power. His funeral at Westminster Abbey drew representatives from across Europe, acknowledging his achievement in restoring English prestige. The king's immediate legacy was mixed. He had rebuilt royal authority after his father's catastrophic reign, but his wars had created financial problems that would plague his successors. His assertion of feudal rights had strengthened monarchy, but his concessions to Parliament had also limited royal power. His territorial conquest in France proved temporary, but his transformation of English military capability was permanent. Edward III's deeper legacy lay in his rehabilitation of English kingship. He had proven that effective leadership could overcome seemingly impossible odds. His reign established precedents for parliamentary cooperation, military innovation, and diplomatic engagement that would guide his successors. Most importantly, he had restored confidence in the institution of monarchy itself. Through Edward III, the children of Edward II achieved their greatest triumph, the complete reversal of their father's failures and the creation of a new golden age of English power. John of Eltham was born on August 15, 1316, at Eltham Palace in Kent. As the second son of Edward II and Isabella of France, he entered a world already shadowed by his father's political troubles. The Great Famine was devastating England, and noble opposition to royal policies was hardening into open rebellion. Unlike his older brother Edward, John experienced childhood during the worst years of the reign. His earliest memories would have been of a court under siege, his father increasingly isolated and desperate. The boy witnessed the execution of Piers Gaveston's successors, the rise of Hugh Despenser the Younger, and the growing rift between his parents. Despite these circumstances, John received a thorough royal education. He was tutored alongside his brother in languages, military arts, and statecraft. Contemporary accounts suggest he was an intelligent and capable student, though inevitably overshadowed by Edward's position as heir. The brothers developed a close relationship that would persist throughout John's brief life. The deposition crisis of 1326-1327 found John at age 10, old enough to understand the catastrophic nature of events, but too young to influence them. He accompanied his mother Isabella and Roger Mortimer during their successful invasion, watching his father's authority collapse entirely. The boy was present at his brother's coronation in February 1327, beginning a new phase of their relationship. Under the regency of Isabella and Mortimer, John's future became a matter of political calculation. As a royal prince, he needed appropriate endowments and titles, but these had to be balanced against the interests of other nobles and the regency's own supporters. The solution came in 1328 when John was created Earl of Cornwall, a title traditionally held by members of the royal family. The earldom of Cornwall carried significant revenues from tin mining and agricultural estates across southwestern England. It also involved ceremonial duties and political responsibilities that prepared John for a potential role in his brother's government. Unlike many medieval younger sons, He was not destined for the church, but for secular lordship. John's education continued under the Regency, focusing increasingly on military matters. England remained at war with Scotland despite the humiliating peace treaty of 1328, and all royal princes were expected to contribute to military efforts. John showed particular aptitude for the tactical and logistical aspects of warfare. The coup of October 1330 that brought Edward III to real power marked John's emergence as an adult political figure. At 14, he was old enough to participate in government and young enough to represent a new generation unscarred by the compromises and failures of the Regency years. His loyalty to his brother never wavered. Edward III's restoration of royal dignity created new opportunities for John's advancement. The king was determined to reverse the military humiliations of previous reigns, particularly in Scotland. John threw himself enthusiastically into these preparations, seeing military service as both duty and opportunity for personal glory. The renewal of war with Scotland in 1332 gave John his first taste of real campaigning. English support for Edward Balliol's claim to the Scottish throne created opportunities for cross-border raids and territorial conquest. John participated in these operations, learning warfare from experienced commanders while building his own military reputation. The decisive campaign came in 1333 with the siege of Berwick-upon-Tweed. This strategic fortress controlled the eastern route between England and Scotland, making its capture essential for any permanent English conquest. John played a significant role in the siege operations, demonstrating both courage and tactical skill. The Battle of Halidon Hill on July 19, 1333, marked the climax of the campaign and John's military career. The English army, led by Edward III, faced a Scottish relief force attempting to break the siege of Berwick. The resulting battle would prove whether the new generation of English leaders could match their ancestors' achievements. The English deployed in the tactical formation that would dominate European battlefields for the next century. Dismounted men-at-arms formed the center, protected by stakes and supported by longbowmen on the flanks. This defensive arrangement invited enemy attacks while maximizing English firepower. The Scottish army, commanded by Archibald Douglas, advanced uphill against the English position. The longbowmen devastated their ranks with sustained volleys, breaking Scottish formations before they could reach English lines. The men-at-arms then counterattacked, completing the destruction of enemy forces. John of Eltham distinguished himself during the battle, fighting alongside his brother in the thick of combat. Contemporary chroniclers praised his courage and skill, noting that the royal brothers fought as common soldiers while maintaining overall command of their forces. The victory vindicated Edward III's military reforms and restored English confidence. The aftermath of Halidon Hill brought triumph and tragedy in equal measure. Berwick surrendered immediately, giving England control of the Scottish border. Scottish resistance collapsed, with many nobles submitting to Edward Balliol's authority. The military reputation of Edward II's reign was finally buried. For John personally, however, victory proved brief. Within weeks of the battle, he fell seriously ill. The exact nature of his illness remains unclear. Contemporary sources mention fever and weakness, suggesting either disease contracted during the campaign or wounds sustained in battle that became infected. Medieval military medicine offered little help for serious illness or injury. Despite the best available treatment, John's condition deteriorated rapidly. He died at Perth in Scotland on September 13, 1336, just months after his greatest triumph. He was 20 years old. John's death devastated his brother and the royal court. Edward III had lost not only a beloved sibling, but also a crucial military and political partner. The king arranged for John's body to be transported south with full honors, demonstrating the importance of maintaining royal dignity even in grief. The funeral took place at Westminster Abbey, where John was buried near the tombs of earlier kings. His elaborate marble effigy, still visible today, depicts him in full military armor, a young warrior frozen in eternal vigilance. The inscription emphasizes his noble birth and early death, standard themes for medieval royal monuments. John of Eltham's legacy rested on unfulfilled promise rather than completed achievement. His brief adult career suggested considerable military and political potential, but death cut short any lasting contributions. He represented the renewal of royal fortunes without living to enjoy its fruits. In the broader story of Edward II's children, John embodied both the costs and possibilities of their father's legacy. He had helped restore a royal military reputation, but paid for this achievement with his life. His death reminded the survivors that political recovery, however complete, could not guarantee personal happiness or longevity. Eleanor of Woodstock was born on June 18, 1318, at Woodstock Palace in Oxfordshire. As the first daughter of Edward II and Isabella of France, she entered a world where royal women held significant but carefully circumscribed power. Her birth provided her parents with a valuable diplomatic asset while adding another dimension to the dynasty's political calculations. Eleanor's early childhood coincided with the final deterioration of her father's reign. The period from 1318 to 1322 saw repeated baronial rebellions, economic crisis, and the growing influence of Hugh Despenser the Younger. These upheavals shaped Eleanor's understanding of power and politics, teaching her that royal authority was neither permanent nor guaranteed. Unlike her brothers, Eleanor's education focused on accomplishments deemed appropriate for a princess. She learned French, Latin, and English literature, developing the linguistic skills essential for international diplomacy. Music, dancing, and needlework completed her cultural training, while religious instruction emphasized the Christian duties of rulership. The political crisis of 1326 to 1327 found Eleanor at age 8, old enough to understand events but too young to influence them. She witnessed her mother Isabella's transformation from dutiful queen to revolutionary leader, learning that royal women could wield unprecedented power when circumstances permitted. This lesson would prove crucial to her later career. Eleanor's value as a diplomatic asset became apparent during the regency of Isabella and Roger Mortimer. European alliances increasingly depended on marriage negotiations, and the availability of royal daughters determined the scope of possible agreements. Eleanor represented Edward III's most valuable bargaining chip in securing foreign support. The marriage negotiations that would define Eleanor's future began in earnest after Edward III's assumption of real power in 1330. The king needed allies for his planned campaigns in Scotland and France, and Eleanor's hand in marriage could secure crucial support from continental powers. The eventual choice revealed both strategic calculation and genuine affection. Reginald II of Guelders emerged as the chosen bridegroom through a combination of political and economic factors. Guelders controlled strategic territories in the Low Countries, offering England access to continental markets and military resources. Reginald himself was young, capable, and heir to substantial lands, an attractive partner for a royal princess. The marriage negotiations required careful diplomacy. Guelders was technically subject to the Holy Roman Emperor, but its rulers maintained practical independence through skillful maneuvering between competing powers. Alliance with England offered protection against French expansion while securing access to English trade and military support. Eleanor and Reginald were married by proxy in 1332 when she was 14. The ceremony at Westminster Abbey demonstrated royal commitment to the alliance while beginning Eleanor's preparation for life abroad. She spent the next several months learning Dutch customs and language, preparing for a future far from English court. The bride's departure for Guelders in 1332 marked the beginning of her independent career. At 14, Eleanor was young, even by medieval standards, but royal daughters were expected to assume adult responsibilities immediately upon marriage. Her new position required diplomatic skill, cultural adaptability, and political acumen. Eleanor's arrival in Guelders coincided with a period of territorial expansion and economic growth. Reginald II was modernizing his administration, developing trade relationships, and strengthening military capabilities. Eleanor contributed to these efforts through her English connections and her own considerable abilities. The early years of marriage proved personally happy and politically successful. Eleanor and Reginald developed a genuine partnership, sharing interests in literature, music, and statecraft. She provided crucial liaison with English diplomats while learning to navigate the complex politics of the Low Countries. Eleanor's political education expanded rapidly as she assumed greater responsibilities. Guelders faced constant pressure from larger neighbors, requiring careful diplomatic maneuvering and occasional military action. Eleanor learned to balance competing interests while maintaining her husband's independence and her own family's strategic objectives. The transformation from English princess to continental duchess accelerated after Reginald II's father died in 1343. Eleanor became Duchess of Guelders at age 25, assuming responsibilities that included territorial administration, diplomatic representation, and military command. Her performance in these roles exceeded contemporary expectations for royal women. Eleanor's widowhood came suddenly in 1343 when Reginald II died after 11 years of marriage. At 25, she found herself regent for their infant son Reginald III, facing immediate challenges from neighboring powers who saw opportunity in Guelders' apparent weakness. Her response demonstrated remarkable political skill and personal determination. The regency period tested Eleanor's abilities to their limits. She faced pressure from the Duke of Brabant, who claimed certain territories, and from the Count of Holland, who sought to expand his influence. Eleanor successfully resisted these encroachments while maintaining internal stability and continuing her late husband's modernization programs. Eleanor's military leadership during this period challenged contemporary assumptions about women's capabilities. She personally commanded troops during several border conflicts, demonstrating strategic acumen and inspiring fierce loyalty among her soldiers. Her success in defending Guelders' territorial integrity earned respect throughout the Low Countries. The Duchess also proved effective in economic administration. She continued developing trade relationships, reformed taxation systems, and supported urban development. Under her regency, Guelders prospered despite constant external threats, demonstrating that capable leadership could overcome apparent disadvantages. Eleanor's diplomatic skills were equally impressive. She maintained alliance with England while building relationships with other continental powers. Her correspondence with her brother Edward III reveals sophisticated political analysis and strategic thinking that influenced English policy toward the Low Countries. The question of remarriage presented Eleanor with difficult choices. Several suitors emerged, offering various political and economic advantages, but Eleanor ultimately chose to remain single. This decision preserved her independence while avoiding potentially disruptive alliance changes that could have destabilized Guelders. Eleanor's relationship with her son Reginald III became increasingly complex as he matured. She gradually transferred authority to him while maintaining significant influence behind the scenes. This transition required delicate management to avoid the conflicts that often erupted between regents and their former wards. The later years of Eleanor's regency saw continued territorial and diplomatic challenges. The ongoing 100 Years' War between England and France created opportunities and dangers for smaller powers like Guelders. Eleanor successfully navigated these complications while maintaining her duchy's independence and prosperity. Eleanor's formal retirement from active governance came in 1361 when Reginald III reached majority. However, she continued to influence policy through informal channels, serving as an elder stateswoman whose advice was widely sought. Her experience and connections made her an invaluable resource for her son's government. The Duchess chose to spend her final years at Deventer, a prosperous town in eastern Guelders. There she established a religious foundation and patronized scholars and artists. Her court became a center of learning that attracted intellectuals from across Europe, enhancing Guelders' cultural reputation. Eleanor of Woodstock died at Deventer on April 22, 1355, at age 36. Her death marked the end of an extraordinary career that had seen her evolve from English princess to continental ruler. Her funeral drew representatives from across the Low Countries, testament to the respect she had earned through her achievements. Eleanor's legacy in Guelders proved lasting. The administrative reforms she had implemented continued under her son's rule, while the diplomatic relationships she had cultivated provided ongoing benefits. Her successful defense of ducal independence became a model for subsequent rulers facing similar challenges. In the broader context of Edward II's children, Eleanor represented the successful adaptation of royal bloodlines to continental politics. She had transformed potential exile into opportunity, using her English connections to build power abroad while contributing to her native country's diplomatic objectives. Eleanor of Woodstock proved that royal daughters could become effective rulers in their own right, not merely diplomatic assets or marriage prizes. Her career demonstrated that capable leadership could overcome the apparent limitations of gender and youth, earning recognition through achievement rather than inheritance. Joan of the Tower was born in July 1321 at the Tower of London during the final crisis of her father's reign. Her birth coincided with the Despenser War, when baronial opposition to Edward II reached its violent climax. The Tower, traditionally a symbol of royal power, had become a refuge for a king under siege, an ironic birthplace for a child whose life would be defined by political exile and dynastic failure. Joan's unusual name reflected the desperate circumstances of her birth. Most royal children were named for saints or family members, but Joan honored Joan of Arc's contemporary Joan of Navarre, suggesting last-minute diplomatic consideration. The location reference of the Tower became permanent, marking her as a child of crisis rather than celebration. Her infancy unfolded against accelerating political collapse. The final years of Edward II's reign saw repeated military defeats, economic devastation, and the growing rift between the king and Queen Isabella. Joan's earliest experiences were of a court in dissolution, where normal royal ceremonies and routines had given way to emergency measures and desperate expedients. The revolution of 1326-1327 transformed 5-year-old Joan's world completely. Her mother Isabella's invasion with Roger Mortimer overthrew her father's regime, leading to his deposition and eventual murder. Joan was too young to understand these events fully, but their consequences would shape every aspect of her future life. Under the regency of Isabella and Mortimer, Joan became a crucial diplomatic asset. The new regime needed to stabilize relations with Scotland, France, and other European powers. Marriage alliances involving royal children were the standard method for securing such agreements, and Joan represented one of the most valuable bargaining chips available. The Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton in 1328 formally ended the long war between England and Scotland, recognizing Scottish independence and arranging dynastic marriages to cement the peace. 7-year-old Joan was betrothed to David Bruce, heir to the Scottish throne, in an arrangement designed to unite the two kingdoms permanently. This betrothal represented a complete reversal of her father's policies. Edward II had spent his reign attempting to conquer Scotland, suffering humiliating defeats at Loudon Hill and Bannockburn. Now his youngest daughter would marry the son of his greatest enemy, Robert the Bruce, legitimizing Scottish independence through royal blood. The marriage negotiations revealed the regency's weakness and desperation. Previous Anglo-Scottish treaties had demanded Scottish submission. This agreement recognized Scottish sovereignty while offering England only the hope of future unification through Joan's children. Contemporary English chroniclers condemned the arrangement as a shameful capitulation. Joan's childhood preparation for queenship began immediately after the betrothal. She received intensive instruction in Scottish history, customs, and language, preparing for a life north of the border. Her education emphasized diplomatic skills rather than cultural accomplishments, reflecting the political nature of her future role. The marriage ceremony took place at Berwick-upon-Tweed on July 17, 1328, when Joan was 7 and David 6. The choice of location, the border fortress that had changed hands repeatedly during the Scottish Wars, symbolized the union of formerly hostile kingdoms. The ceremony itself was modest, reflecting both kingdoms' exhausted finances. Joan's early years in Scotland proved challenging. The Scottish court remained suspicious of English intentions, viewing the young queen as a potential spy or political weapon. David II's youth and inexperience created additional complications, as regents controlled royal policy while the married children remained largely ceremonial figures. The couple's education continued under Scottish supervision, with Joan learning to present herself as Scottish queen rather than English princess. This cultural transformation required abandoning many English customs and adopting Scottish ones, a process that often proved emotionally difficult for a homesick child. The renewal of Anglo-Scottish conflict in 1332 placed Joan in an impossible position. Her brother Edward III supported Edward Balliol's claim to the Scottish throne, directly challenging her husband's legitimacy. She found herself caught between family loyalty and marital duty, unable to satisfy either fully. The Battle of Halidon Hill in 1333 demonstrated English military superiority and forced David II into French exile. Joan accompanied her husband to France, beginning a period of displacement that would last nearly a decade. For the teenage queen, this exile meant separation from both her birth and adopted countries. Life at the French court provided Joan with sophisticated political education. She observed the complex diplomacy surrounding the early stages of the 100 Years' War, learning how smaller powers navigated between competing great powers. These lessons would prove valuable during her later career. Joan's relationship with David II became increasingly strained during their French exile. The young king resented his dependence on French support and blamed his English queen for Scotland's weakness. Their marriage, arranged for political convenience, never developed into genuine partnership or affection. The return to Scotland in 1341 marked a new phase of Joan's career. David II had matured into an assertive ruler determined to restore Scottish independence and prestige. Joan supported these efforts while struggling to define her own role in a court that remained suspicious of her English origins. David's capture at the Battle of Neville's Cross in 1346 created another crisis for Joan. Her husband's imprisonment in England left Scotland without effective leadership while creating dangerous succession questions. Joan emerged as a significant political figure during this emergency, helping to maintain royal authority. The Queen's regency period demonstrated considerable political skill. She worked effectively with Scottish nobles to maintain government functions while negotiating for David's release. Her English connections proved valuable in these diplomatic efforts, though they also reinforced suspicions about her ultimate loyalties. David II's release in 1357 marked the beginning of the final phase of Joan's queenship. The king returned from captivity determined to modernize Scotland and reduce English influence. Joan supported these reforms while gradually withdrawing from active political involvement. The royal marriage's childlessness became an increasing source of concern as both David and Joan aged. Without heirs, the carefully planned unification of England and Scotland through their offspring could never occur. The marriage that had been arranged to solve dynastic problems had instead created new ones. Joan's later years were marked by growing isolation at the Scottish court. David II's interest in annulling their marriage to marry his mistress Margaret Logie created personal humiliation while threatening Joan's political position. She resisted these efforts while preparing for an uncertain future. The annulment controversy dominated the final years of Joan's queenship. David's desire for a new marriage reflected both personal preference and political calculation, but Joan's resistance demonstrated that royal women could assert agency even in desperate circumstances. The dispute remained unresolved at David's death in 1371. David II's sudden death ended Joan's 30-year career as Scottish queen. At 50, she found herself a childless widow in a foreign country, with uncertain claims to either Scottish or English support. Her response to this crisis revealed the diplomatic skills developed over decades of political uncertainty. Joan chose to return to England, where her brother Edward III welcomed her with genuine affection. She established herself at Hertford Castle, creating a comfortable household supported by royal pensions. Her final years were spent in peaceful retirement, removed from the political struggles that had defined her earlier life. Joan of the Tower died at Hertford Castle on September 7, 1362, at age 41. She was buried at Greyfriars Church in London, her tomb marking the end of a life defined by unfulfilled political hopes. The marriage that was meant to unite two kingdoms had instead symbolized their permanent separation. Joan's legacy reflected the limitations of medieval diplomacy. Despite decades of effort, she had failed to produce the heirs who might have unified England and Scotland. Her life demonstrated how royal women could become casualties of political arrangements beyond their control, their personal happiness sacrificed to dynastic necessity. In the broader story of Edward II's children, Joan represented the costs of their father's political failures. Her exile and childlessness embodied the permanent consequences of the deposition crisis, showing how royal bloodlines could be scattered and diminished by political upheaval. Adam Fitzroy remains the most mysterious of Edward II's children, known primarily through fragments of official records and chroniclers' brief mentions. As the king's acknowledged illegitimate son, his life illuminated aspects of Edward's character rarely visible in formal documentation. The personal relationships and private emotions of a monarch whose public persona was so often characterized by political miscalculation and military failure. The exact circumstances of Adam's birth remain unclear, though most historians place it around 1307, making him roughly contemporary with his legitimate half-brother Edward III. His mother's identity is unknown, though she was presumably someone at court with whom Edward II maintained a relationship during the early years of his reign, before his marriage to Isabella of France in 1308. The name Adam was uncommon among the royal family, suggesting personal rather than dynastic significance. Fitzroy, meaning son of the king, was the standard designation for acknowledged royal bastards, indicating that Edward II formally recognized the boy as his son despite the child's illegitimate status. Royal acknowledgement carried significant implications in medieval England. It distinguished Adam from the numerous unrecognized illegitimate children of kings, granting him certain privileges and expectations of royal patronage. However, it also marked him as permanently excluded from the succession, regardless of his abilities or the circumstance of his legitimate siblings. Adam's upbringing likely occurred at court under royal supervision, though specific details are lacking. Royal bastards typically received education appropriate to their station, military training, basic literacy, and preparation for careers in royal service. They were neither ignored nor fully integrated into the royal family, occupying an ambiguous position between nobility and commonality. The boy's relationship with Edward II appears to have been genuinely affectionate. Unlike his formal interactions with his legitimate children, the king's treatment of Adam suggests personal warmth uncomplicated by political calculations. This relationship provided insights into Edward's capacity for parental feeling when freed from dynastic pressures. Adam's first significant appearance in historical records occurs during the Scottish campaign of 1322. By this time a teenager, he accompanied his father's army as it advanced into Scotland in what would prove to be Edward II's final major military expedition. His presence demonstrated both royal favor and the king's confidence in the boy's abilities. The 1322 campaign represented Edward II's last attempt to achieve military glory in Scotland. Previous expeditions had ended in humiliation, particularly the catastrophic defeat at Bannockburn in 1314. This new effort was intended to restore royal prestige while demonstrating that English arms could still triumph over Scottish resistance. The campaign began promisingly with English forces advancing deep into Scottish territory. However, Robert the Bruce's scorched earth tactics denied the English army supplies while exposing it to constant harassment. The expedition gradually transformed from conquest to retreat as logistical problems mounted. Adam Fitzroy's death occurred during this deteriorating military situation, though exact details remain unknown. Contemporary sources mention only that he died while serving with his father's forces, suggesting either disease, accident, or enemy action. His youth and inexperience may have contributed to whatever circumstances led to his demise. The king's response to his son's death revealed genuine paternal grief. Edward II arranged for Adam's burial at Tynemouth Priory, a prestigious religious house in Northumberland. The choice of location, neither a simple field grave nor a royal tomb, reflected the boy's intermediate status as acknowledged but illegitimate royal offspring. The burial arrangements also demonstrated Edward II's personal attention to his son's memory. Tynemouth Priory received royal patronage to ensure proper maintenance of Adam's tomb, indicating that the king wanted his bastard son remembered appropriately. These provisions suggest emotional attachment transcending political calculation. Adam Fitzroy's brief life illuminated aspects of Edward II's character often obscured by political analysis. His acknowledgement of the boy, their apparent closeness, and his grief at Adam's death revealed capacity for personal affection that contrasted sharply with his political failures and controversial relationships with male favorites. The boy's story also highlighted the broader human costs of medieval warfare. While chroniclers focused on strategic movements and political consequences, individual deaths like Adam's represented personal tragedies for families caught up in royal ambitions. His death symbolized the price paid by ordinary participants in extraordinary events. In the broader context of Edward II's children, Adam represented paths not taken and possibilities unfulfilled. His early death meant that his potential contributions to his family's recovery would never be tested. Unlike his legitimate siblings, who all lived to adulthood and faced the consequences of their father's reign, Adam died while their shared world was still intact. Adam Fitzroy's legacy was minimal but poignant. a reminder that even failed kings could inspire love and loyalty in their children, and that royal parenthood involved emotional as well as political dimensions. His brief existence and early death captured the personal costs of the political upheavals that would soon destroy his father's reign and scatter his legitimate siblings across Europe. The children of Edward II lived lives that spanned the arc from dynastic crisis to royal recovery. Born during their father's chaotic reign, they witnessed the collapse of medieval kingship and participated in its ultimate reconstruction. Their individual fates reflected both the consequences of political failure and the resilience of royal bloodlines. Edward III achieved the most complete transformation, evolving from a boy king controlled by regents into one of medieval England's most successful monarchs. His 50-year reign restored royal prestige, established English military dominance, and created the foundation for generations of future royal power. Through him, the humiliations of his father's era were not merely forgotten, but definitively reversed. John of Eltham embodied the costs of this recovery. His brief life demonstrated that military glory carried personal risks that could not be avoided through royal privilege or political skill. His death at 20 represented promise unfulfilled, potential sacrifice to the demands of dynastic restoration. Eleanor of Woodstock found success through adaptation and exile. Her transformation from English princess to continental duchess showed how royal women could create independent power bases when circumstances demanded. Her effective regency in Guelders proved that political ability could transcend the apparent limitations of gender and age. Joan of the Tower experienced the most complete failure of dynastic hopes. Despite 30 years as Scottish queen, she produced no heirs to unite the warring kingdoms. Her childless widowhood symbolized the ultimate futility of diplomatic marriages that ignored personal compatibility and political reality. Adam Fitzroy's early death represented roads not taken and relationships unexplored. His brief existence illuminated Edward II's capacity for personal affection while demonstrating how medieval warfare consumed lives, regardless of royal blood or paternal love. Together, these 5 lives revealed how royal children navigated the collapse and reconstruction of monarchical authority. They faced choices between loyalty and survival, tradition and adaptation, personal desire and dynastic duty. Their responses shaped not only their individual fates, but also the broader trajectory of English royal history. The legacy of Edward II's children extended far beyond their lifetimes. Edward III's descendants would rule England for centuries, their claims to the throne validated by his successful reign. Eleanor's diplomatic connections influenced continental politics for generations. Even the failures of John, Joan, and Adam contributed to historical understanding of medieval royal life. Their collective story demonstrated that political catastrophe, however complete, need not be permanent. Royal dynasties could recover from seemingly impossible circumstances through effective leadership, strategic adaptation, and simple persistence. The children of Edward II proved that even the most discredited bloodlines could produce successful rulers when circumstances and character aligned. Most fundamentally, they showed that royal children were both products and creators of their historical moment. Shaped by their father's failures, they in turn shaped the monarchy that emerged from those failures. Their lives bridged the gap between the medieval past and the emerging modern world, carrying forward what was valuable while discarding what had proved destructive. In the end, Edward II's children achieved something their father never could. They made royal blood respectable again.